Hey there, extra historians. Welcome to Extra Context, the part of the show where we tell you all the things we left out, the stuff we got wrong, and where we sometimes call it lies and we sometimes don't, because we're going to try something new and see if it sticks. I'm Rob, I'm the head writer of Extra History, and today we're talking about our series on American Mass Deportation. I have a few things I have to talk about at the beginning of this. The first is thank you so much to our patrons who make our show possible. You are extremely important, particularly in series like this that are controversial, that hit on hot button issues, and where our second episode got demonetized because we used the name of a government program, the official name of a government program. Having the Patreon being on Nebula means that we can distribute our risk a little bit if something like this happened. We were partially demonetized. It was restored, but you lose the traffic. It gets buried in the algorithm when things like that happen. So to make sure it didn't happen for the third episode, you will notice that we bleeped the word. During this episode, we'll call it Operation W, and then we dropped it for the rest because when Matt tried beeping every word of it, it became very annoying very quickly. So thank you very much. If you would like to support us there, you can go over there. You can participate in our Discord. You can shape the future of our series by suggesting and voting for topics. Also, you can find us on Nebula, where you can see our first episode on the formation of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Let's jump in, because there's so much to get to. Recommended reading for this series, The Deportation Machine by Adam Goodman. Walls and Mirrors, Mexican Americans, Mexican Immigrants, and the Politics of Ethnicity by David Gutierrez. This is a really good text on, if you want to learn more about how conservative Hispanic organizations supported these deportations and then found themselves swept up in it and then came out against them. This is the book that's going to give you that. Impossible Subjects, Illegal Aliens and the Making of Modern America by May M. Guy. Really great book. And Harvest of Loneliness, a 56-minute documentary on the Bracero program. You can find it online. There are also academic articles down in the description. Let's just jump in. We're going to try not calling this lies. So I started writing Extra History in 2018. We are at this point a decade-old show. And though I've now written the majority of Extra History episodes, there were certain things that had been certain things that have been set, like the term lies, before I came on board. And, I have to think very hard about whether to change those things at any point. A lot of commenters asked us to. So again, we're going to try it with this series. Extra context is something that we talk about a lot in our completes. So at least that's a pre-existing phrase. Something we didn't put in the series that I wanted to bring up is one of the things about this program that made it less popular in large cities where it was carried out was a lot of times they put up detention camps in public parks. And I think it's interesting that the more visible it became, the more people didn't like it. Though overall people were supportive, and this, was bipartisan support for these deportation programs, particularly in the 1930s and 1950s. It is mostly in retrospect where people dislike them, though there was a rising tide of anger about them, but they also ran out of money and kind of stopped fairly quickly. So there was backlash, but it didn't end up being a huge thing. I wrote these starting in May of 2025. I think the first episode was turned in, the first draft at the end of May. So a lot of the parallels that people have pointed out, whether it's, Chicago, the deportation campaign focusing on LA and Chicago, there had been some operations in LA when I was writing it in May, but the protests hadn't started. It wasn't a big flashpoint yet. There was no hint of Chicago yet. So really, those parallels are just organic. I didn't put them in intentionally. Except for what Matt said at the beginning of episode 3, explaining what we had done with the audio, we changed nothing in this series from when I first wrote it to, last week when the final episode came out. So any comparisons to what is happening now are just that's just, we reported it straight. And if you see parallels, you're just seeing parallels. Patron question from Stephen Watts. Was there ever an attempt to curb or discourage Irish immigration to America? I live in Ireland, where immigration has become a big issue recently, and I'm curious with how we were received around the world. We talked about this a bit in our Irish Potato Famine series, and also our episode on John L. Sullivan, the boxer. There's no official government effort to stem Irish, I would specifically say Irish Catholic immigration, because that's what was, that's mostly what was controversial, right? But you do have local municipalities, particularly like cities and towns, that are passing ordinances that say like Catholic churches have to look like Protestant churches, that say that Catholic schools can't be set up. And the Catholic Church is very aggressive and successful in getting those repealed on First Amendment grounds. And there are vigilante groups like the KKK that are going after the Irish, mostly in intimidation rather than like necessarily direct attacks. But particularly in the 1920s, the KKK was very, very centered around anti-Catholic sentiment. There was this whole conspiracy theory about particularly nuns in convents in the United States and Canada that were like murdering children. And I would like to do more on that subject, because I think it's a neglected part of our national history, is understanding that these big panics about particularly like harm of children by minority groups or people that are considered like sort of political enemies, it's like an ongoing, this is not like a new thing when you see these conspiracy theories that are very, they're just real similar to what you sometimes hear these days on the internet. YouTube question. I often meet people that despair over the current vibe of the country and how the way they viewed America has changed. But to those that have paid attention to our history, the current trends and talking points in American politics have been done time and again throughout the country's history. The struggle of citizenship and immigration is core to America's identity. Thank you for covering such difficult history at such an apt time. So I always go back to this conversation I had with my father back in the George W. Bush administration when enhanced interrogation and torture was like a big thing. It was a hot topic, and you had figures on the left like John Kerry and figures on the right like John McCain, who was tortured when he was a POW in Vietnam, were saying a lot of like, this is not who we are, and America doesn't torture people, and like all this stuff. And understanding that this was rhetoric, it still made my dad incredibly angry, because he was a Vietnam veteran, and he was like, we waterboarded people in Vietnam. Like, this is not a new thing. Like, we tortured people in Vietnam. I saw it happen. I have books where there are pictures of it. John Kerry especially knows this because he was part of, the investigations into acts during the war that could be considered war crimes. And it really upset him that while he understood why they were creating this rhetoric, his feeling was, if you don't actually confront what happened, then you can't learn from it. We're just going to make the same mistakes over and over because we keep brushing it under the rug and memory holing it. And just because it's politically easier to say, oh, well, we're the United States and we don't do that and we shouldn't do that. It's like, no, we need to reckon with the fact that that has happened before in our history and we should not be letting it come back, right? And he just felt it was very disingenuous. And I think about that a lot recently because, we talk a little bit about it later, but like we use the term unprecedented a lot these days. And some things are genuinely unprecedented for sure. But there are also things that are returns of previous policies. There's a lot of worry, for example, about the National Guard being put in a position where they end up shooting at demonstrators. And it's like, well, that happened, Kent State, right? To me, what's worrying is not that we've never been here before, it's that we have been here before and it was at very dark times in our history. YouTube question, the most ironically hilarious thing about terrifying the Mexican community out of California is that California used to be part of Mexico. Yeah, we go into more of that in episode 2. And depending where you grew up, your local state school system might have taught you more about that and might have taught you about these programs. I know people and had people mention in the comments that in American public schools, this was covered for them. And that may be something that came in later, because at this point, I'm in my early 40s, so it's been over 20 years since I was a high school student. But also that, I grew up in Hawaii and we had to learn like the Hawaiian monarchy and the kings and queens and like all this kind of stuff. So we may have missed some stuff. Also, I kept trying to remember why the year that I took US history felt weirdly truncated at the end. And I remembered there was like a 2-week teacher's strike that year. So we blazed through like the last half of the 20th century. So for all I know, maybe this was in my textbook and it just didn't make an impression because we went through all of it in a single day due to a teacher's strike. But I think Spanish America is very interesting, and kind of the overlap between Mexico and the US in the Southwest. Santa Fe's old town. It's one of my favorite places in the US. And it's really fascinating to be at like Santa Fe or San Antonio or some places in California. And you're like, oh, this is the same like SimCity plan. It's just like stamp, 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 military plaza, church plaza. It's there's like that mission style thing where you just like plunk down, like, this is how you build the building. This is how you build the plaza. It's a really interesting kind of survival of the Spanish Empire. Architecturally still there today. YouTube question, I appreciate this. I think hearing the burdens that legal migrants endured is shocking. I do have a question. Were all of the migrants mentioned in this episode here legally? I think that while seeming pedantic, it's core to understanding this issue as it pertains to the conversation happening today. Depends what you mean by legally, because, before, say, like World War I, it's a lot more fluid, right? You don't have penalties for entering at not a designated crossing point. Overall, except for certain things like the Chinese Exclusion Act, like if you showed up in the US and you were allowed to land, like that's pretty much it. Like you're not a citizen, but like you're living there, like you can eventually get citizenship. Now, many of those deported in the 30s and the 50s were American citizen children who gained it via birthright citizenship. But honestly, there was like not very much opportunity to check citizenship or appeal the decision, because especially in the 30s, so a lot of people don't even have birth certificates in the 30s still, right? And as we'll talk about later, there's no like card you get in the US that says, yes, you are a citizen. Like you can get a social security card, like passport, that kind of thing. But like most people in the US don't have passports, right? And that's definitely true in 1930, 1950. Right? So it could be very difficult to prove you're a citizen, especially if you were just grabbed up at your job or walking around or whatever. A lot of these people just had what they had in their wallets, and often that wasn't enough. And we do know of instances of people who were deported who were American citizens, or people who their parents were deported, so the American citizen children went with them because of voluntary return, right? The records are sketchy. Often there's not even a record of it. There have been estimates that up to 60% of departures in the 1930s, that includes both voluntary return and self-deportation, were American citizens. And there were times when people who were deported had American families. Esteban Torres, who was in the House of Representatives for California for 16 years, his father was deported in 1933. He went to work at a mine. They were living in a mining camp in Arizona. His father went to work at the mine, got grabbed, and they just never saw him again. He and his brother, he was 3 years old. So you have people like that. And you have people who get deported and then end up coming back in legally. You also have people who, on occasion, were folded into the Bracero program, who were allowed to do that instead of being deported. on occasion. Or you have, also you have people who are handed over to the Mexican border authorities who like essentially sold them as like labor to farms near the border, south of the border in Mexico. Like they'd be like, well, we're going to either take you maybe like where you're from or maybe somewhere else, or we're just going to like take you to this guy who is hiring laborers, right? So it's one of the reasons it's hard to talk about this is it's sort of difficult, and often families are of mixed status, which is what makes it difficult today, right? Episode 1, patron question from Liz. On behalf of my fellow Canadians, I'd like to thank you for the grant of the chunk of Wisconsin south of Superior and north of Lake Michigan. Found the map around 1157. Very kind of you. We are nothing if not generous. Patron question from Bo Carey. Isn't the Caucasian League also called the White League from your Civil Rights Act video? No. So believe it or not, these are separate organizations. The thing you have to remember is with a lot of these groups, they'll take a name that's popular elsewhere, whether it's the Caucasian League, the White League, the Red Shirts. All of these are groups that they're highly localized, right? Don't think of it as an organization with a national head or a top-down leadership. These are highly local militia groups, basically, right? Like, so they're guys from this town or this county who are dealing with things they see in their immediate vicinity, right? And often they will take on these names that are popular in other places. After the KKK was broken in post-Civil War, a lot of them called themselves rifle clubs or the Red Shirts. The Red Shirts was a really big one. But again, when I say really big, I mean that the name was very famous, so people like took on the name. Kind of the same way, when Al-Qaeda was really huge, and you'd have groups that are like, we are Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula or whatever. It was sort of a brand. So they have similar names, but they're not connected. At some point, we'll do some reconstruction stuff. YouTube question. You're usually good about using period-accurate flags, but you keep using the PRC Chinese flag for pre-20th century time periods. We are not usually good at using period-accurate flags. I'm going to push back on that. No, we often will use a flag if the time that if the flag that we're talking about is not central to the episode, and it's going to be something that doesn't read well in 1 second or 2 seconds, that you don't look at it and think that is China, we are going to use the most familiar flag to improve readability. I often say that we try to be comprehensible, not comprehensive. Often we will mark it with an asterisk that says, anachronistic flag for the sake of readability. We didn't do that this time. If we had gone with period-accurate flags for China, because we mention it a number of times, we would have changed the flag every time we presented it, and that just would have been too confusing. So that's why we made that choice. YouTube question. Oh, yeah, by the way, I do live in Hong Kong and have for 12 years, so I am aware that the flag was not that yet. One of my favorite facts about this time is how Oregon or Washington basically bragged publicly that they didn't have any Chinese working in their state because they basically brought a bunch of Chinese labor by train and then removed them back across the state border the same way before dark. And when I say favorite, I mean I hate it. Yeah, one thing we didn't talk about a lot are interstate deportations, because you also have those, particularly with labor movements, where the authorities would come and just like load a bunch of striking miners on the train and send them over to the next county or the next state. And sometimes when you read about deportation, they also will go back to like colonial era and like the 17th century, where you had exile, where you could be like quote unquote deported from a town, right? Episode 2, patron question from Bo Carey. So the U.S. Border Patrol has been using oppressive tactics before the Reagan and Trump presidencies, and in other presidencies as well. But I did not know the Mexican Border Patrol uses similar tactics. I know Border Patrol can legally racially profile since a Supreme Court ruling made in 1975. That's actually the opposite. We'll talk about that. But these actions seem to precede that. Did the Supreme Court ruling officially make it legal, or was it a failed attempt to challenge these malicious laws? United States versus Brignone-Ponce in 1975 is a case in which the Supreme Court determined it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment to stop a car, use a roving patrol car to stop a vehicle solely on the basis that the driver appeared of Mexican descent. And that's what codified what we often today call like racial profiling, in the sense that you can't do it. A recent Supreme Court decision has basically rolled this back. By the way, the guy that they caught was not Mexican in this 1975 case, but he was a people smuggler, basically. But it set this precedent. He was caught a number of times and ended up going to prison. Patron question from Gage Hardesty. I noticed you keep putting an O in Bracero, as in Brocero. Is this a typing mistake? Yes, it is a typing mistake. And I apologize. It is not an abbreviation, which is what you asked. When a spelling error slips in, it often gets repeated because assets get reused. And I should have caught it, and I didn't. So thank you for pointing it out. Allie did an amazing job with these episodes, considering the difficult subject matter. Our artist, she is wonderfully talented. And I can only thank her for all of the excellent work she did on this. Has any U.S. government, state, or federal ever issued documentation explicitly declaring citizenship? Mass Deportation 2 shows an artistic drawing of a wallet with a U.S. citizen identification, but I haven't encountered any documentation that declares this explicitly. I've checked driver's licenses and voter registration in multiple states, military IDs, passports, birth certificates, and while they often describe a place of origin, they all stop short of saying U.S. citizen. If you have a passport or a passport card is a passport you use to travel a land or sea border from U.S. to Canada or U.S. to Mexico. That is essentially a declaration of citizenship, because you can't get one unless you're a U.S. citizen. But yes, you're correct. There isn't there was a decision made out of practical reasons that we're not going to just give driver's licenses to citizens because it's better to have safe roads, right? So yeah, and it can be weirdly difficult to prove your citizenship with just like what's in your wallet as a result. And you think back when, as I said, some people in the 30s and the 50s just didn't have birth certificates. Yeah, so if you were picked up, it could be very difficult to prove your identity. But yes, you're correct. Most IDs, especially because they're state issued, most IDs are state issued in the United States. And you do have people in the military who are not citizens. During Vietnam, my dad served with a guy from California who got in trouble with the law and found out then at the court that he had been carried across illegally as a child and was not a citizen, and was given the option of going to jail, or I think he was going to be deported. But he had the option to go into the army and get his citizenship that way. And instead, he was killed in the Mekong Delta with my dad watching. So that's, again, like these stories can seem very simple, or these laws can seem very simple and easy to follow. In reality, they are complicated. So national ID is a very hot topic in the United States in general. Both Republicans and Democrats have various reasons for not supporting it. That's not this way in many other places in the world. Like in Hong Kong, I have an ID that I carry with me everywhere that if you run it, it shows my immigration status. It's like living under visas for over a decade, right? But there are various reasons we don't have that in the US. YouTube question. I love that you highlighted why it was important to understand that each number was a person with a life. It really adds weight to the data. It provides people that they too are just a number to someone. Yeah, as I wrote this series, I was actually in the process of renewing my passport and my daughter's passport. She got her first passport that's not a baby passport. And it was interesting because the passports had changed in the meantime, right? They used to have like if you haven't gotten a new passport, it has like a card. Your identification page is now a solid card. And there have been like a few changes in like that you can't wear glasses anymore in your photo. So it was, I was thinking a lot about this, and it was injected a little bit of fun and enjoyment too in reading up on passports. A lot of this stuff comes about due to World War I, and then a lot of the Mexican, like U.S.-Mexico border stuff comes out because of Pancho Villa, right, in the revolution, and some raids across, and that's when you start getting lots of military being sent down there. It's another part of this story. As a Mexican, I honestly didn't know that Mexico worked that much with the U.S. in the first half of the video. Hell, I didn't know that the Bracero program was a thing. The stuff about the Mexican government and their perspectives was probably the thing that I found most interesting, learning about this. And you always have to, with cross-border issues, you always have to take it from both sides. You got to understand where both sides are coming from. And I think too often we only think about this from the American perspective. I knew of the Bracero program. I'm not going to lie, mostly through the Tom Lehrer song, George Murphy. I was a huge, and am a huge Tom Lehrer fan. Rest in peace, he just passed away. But I kind of knew of it through that, and then kind of read up on it. Learning about the mid-20th century through Tom Lehrer songs was a really interesting thing when I was a teenager. Just like, oh, that's funny. Let me look that up. George Murphy was a California politician that was one of the first big actors turned politicians back when that was a novelty. In fact, one of the first big jokes in the song is Hollywood has often tried to mix show business and politics, from Ellen Gahagan to Ronald Reagan, with a big question mark on the end, like, who's going to vote for that? This is a song from the 1960s. So I was like, when he was starting to float, maybe I'll run for office. YouTube question 334. This varies. This is the standards for photos. This varies a lot with passport agencies as a whole. I was able to smile from a passport card with no issue from the Department of State or the agency itself. Yeah, I feel like it can vary by office too on occasion. But one of the new ones is you can't wear glasses anymore. Episode 3. I wanted to point out that we've talked before about how much the American government likes public-private partnerships. And this was the fact that NASA is partially with kind of defense manufacturers and aerospace manufacturers. And this was very much true for Operation W, in that airlines and shipping companies were bidding on the deportation flights, the deportation ships. And it was a big controversy when a Mexican company was chosen, because American shipping firms were not happy about that, but they were also bidding too high. YouTube question, for the confused, the name of is the opposite of Operation Dryfont. Yeah, we discussed why we had to make that change. Someone else said, never has a silence been more deafening. Yeah, thank you again. Thank you for sticking with us. I know that wasn't ideal. Someone commented, hey Matt, I can only speak for myself, but as one who needs to hear parts 1 and 2 before part 3 for context, I, along with the majority of your audience, just substituted the word in once we realized the connection. Now, I can't speak for all, really, but I do appreciate and understand why you bleeped it, and I respect that. Thank you for not only being accurate, but unfortunately sanitized. Love your series and try to catch every new one within 12 hours. Keep up the good work, and I'm sorry I could only really contribute through watch time and engagement. Thank you for contributing that way. We really appreciate it. That is a big contribution. So thank you. And thank you for your comment. We really enjoyed getting comments like that. And someone said, it's insane that we quite literally are repeating history bar for bar. Yeah, I was really surprised when I was like, well, here comes the Chicago thing, I guess. I think part of it is I genuinely believe not only has, President Trump brought it up several times as a model, but I think there are other people in the administration that are a big fan of this. So I think they are following the playbook. And also avoided part of the playbook in that, Operation W kind of petered out because it ran out of money because of the budget bill that was passed, which is very large. That is not going to happen with ICE anytime soon. So there we are. Coming up on Extra History, we've got Alexander the Great's Egypt, which is about the Ptolemaic dynasty, an anthology of historical tyrants, Leopold II, King Herod, Qin Shi Huangdi, and Richard III. This is going to be, we're going to look at their different leadership styles, the things that made them tyrants, how they were different from one another, how their circumstances were different, whether they, quote unquote, were tyrants. I think probably all of them are going to be, but Herod, the things that are very famous for Herod having done are things he mostly did not do, like the Massacre of the Innocents, right? And then the next one is a Rob pick series. I'm going to do something fun. There have been a lot of very heavy episodes recently, and I think we should do something fun. So I'm thinking about a bunch of different things. Ibn Battuta's side trip. Yeah, as I said, I've been thinking a lot about the word unprecedented recently. I think we often use it as a synonym for unthinkable, when in fact a lot of the things that are happening are in fact precedented, right? That we've been here before. And one is, and again, this is going to be a little bit lighter, but we have the situation with Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel. And I heard a lot of people say, this kind of thing has never happened before. Yeah, it absolutely has, right? So back in the late 1960s, one of the most famous and successful shows on TV was the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour on CBS. One of the reasons it was successful, so it's these two folk musicians who also do comedy sketches and stuff about the news. And one of the reasons it was so successful is they were making kind of gestures toward the counterculture. And also they were being pretty openly critical of the Vietnam War. And one of the few kind of voices on broadcast television that were doing that. So they actually exchanged a few letters. LBJ sent one to them. They sent one back that were pretty cordial, with LBJ saying, I don't agree, but I understand that being the president means people get to make fun of you. And they sent up a letter back saying it was nice that it's good for him to be, thank you for being a good sport, basically. But then Nixon came in, and Nixon famously had an enemies list that included a lot of media people. And 5 months into Nixon's first term, they were canceled, right? So there's always been a feeling that, it's generally acknowledged that there was a behind-the-scenes pressure campaign that got them canceled. It was due to a contract dispute that later went to civil court, and the Smothers Brothers won. That this was not actually a breach of contract. I don't want to get into it, but it involved the delivery of episodes so they could be reviewed for possible censoring, essentially. There was pushback also by affiliate stations, local affiliates that were in conservative markets. There was some sponsor pushback, but generally it's believed that the Nixon administration pulled strings behind the scenes to get this done. So everything old is new again, right? My worry, again, is not that this has never happened before, but many of these things did happen before at times in American history that are not looked at as our best moments. So, but thank you. Take care of yourself. Take care of everyone else around you, your community. See you next time.
Thank you so much to Zeliad's Architectures, Lotus Wolf, Kuyakoi, Joseph Blame, Hunter Z, Dominic Valenciana, Arls Posting, and Angelo Valenciana for being the best legendary patrons.